In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurked behind every boulder and survival meant trusting your team with your life, a unit of elite Navy SEALs faced their darkest hour. Their commander had vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. Radio silence stretched into hours, then days. The enemy was closing in. Ammunition was running low, and hope was fading fast. But sometimes, when all seems lost, salvation comes from the most unexpected source. What they discovered would challenge everything they thought they knew about courage, loyalty, and the invisible warriors who fight in the shadows of war. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his scope and surveyed the valley below. His team of 8 Navy SEALs had been positioned on this Afghan mountainside for 3 days, gathering intelligence on Taliban movements in the region. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: observe, report, and extract. Nothing about their current situation felt straightforward anymore. Morrison lowered his binoculars and glanced at his watch. The extraction helicopter should have been here 6 hours ago. His radio had been silent since yesterday afternoon, and the growing knot in his stomach told him something had gone terribly wrong. Behind him, his men maintained their positions, but he could sense their growing unease. These were battle-hardened warriors, men who had seen combat in the most dangerous corners of the world, yet the silence from command was eating away at their confidence. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez crawled up beside him, his face streaked with camouflage paint and 3 days' worth of stubble. "Skipper, we've got movement in the village. Looks like they're setting up checkpoints on all the roads leading out of the valley." Morrison took the offered binoculars and studied the activity below. Taliban fighters were indeed positioning themselves strategically throughout the small mountain village. Their escape routes were being systematically cut off. How many? I count at least 40, maybe more. They've got RPGs and what looks like a mounted 50 cal on that pickup truck near the mosque. Rodriguez paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "Sir, they know we're up here. This isn't random patrol activity." The commander felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. 8 men were counting on him to get them home alive, and their situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without communication with headquarters, he had no way of knowing if backup was coming, or if they'd been written off as casualties of war. The thought made his jaw clench. Sergeant Williams, their communications specialist, approached in a low crouch. "Still nothing on any frequency, sir. Either our equipment is completely fried, or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew the implications. Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "We're going to have to move. Staying here means getting surrounded and picked off one by one. There's a ridgeline about 2 clicks north that should give us better visibility and multiple escape routes."
He paused, studying the faces of his men.
"We leave in 30 minutes. Travel light, stay low, and watch each other's backs." As his team began preparing for movement, Morrison took one last look at the valley below. Something felt wrong about this entire mission from the beginning. The intelligence had been too clean, too convenient. Someone had wanted them in this exact location, and now they were paying the price for trusting information that might have been compromised. The team moved out in single file, Morrison taking point. They had covered barely half a kilometer when the first shots rang out. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed across the mountainside, followed immediately by the heavier thump of RPG rounds exploding against the rocks behind them. "Contact left! Contact left!" Morrison shouted into his radio, forgetting momentarily that no one was listening on the other end. His training kicked in automatically as he dove behind a large boulder, his rifle already returning fire toward the muzzle flashes he could see among the trees. The ambush was well planned and professionally executed. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves along the exact route Morrison had chosen, suggesting they had been monitoring the SEAL team far longer than anyone had realized. The enemy had the high ground, superior numbers, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Rodriguez took a round through the shoulder and rolled behind cover, his face twisted in pain, but his rifle still active. "I'm hit, but I can still fight." They were pinned down in an exposed position with limited ammunition and no hope of air support. The smart tactical decision would be to find cover, establish a defensive perimeter, and hope reinforcements would arrive. But deep down, he knew no one was coming. Williams was frantically working his radio, cycling through every frequency in his arsenal. "Still nothing, sir. It's like we don't exist anymore." The firefight intensified as more Taliban fighters joined the battle. Morrison could hear the distinctive whistle of mortar rounds incoming and knew they had perhaps minutes before their position became completely untenable. He made another command decision that would separate him from his team forever. "Listen up," he shouted over the gunfire. "I'm going to draw their fire and give you a chance to reach that ridgeline. When I move, you move in the opposite direction. Don't look back, don't wait for me, just go." "Sir, we're not leaving you," Rodriguez protested, blood seeping through his uniform. "That's an order." Morrison's voice carried the authority of a man who had led warriors through hell and back. "Your job is to get the team home alive. My job is to make sure that happens." Before anyone could argue further, Morrison broke from cover and began moving toward the enemy positions, his rifle chattering as he laid down suppressive fire. The Taliban fighters immediately shifted their attention to this new threat, giving his team the opening they needed. The last thing his men saw was their commander disappearing into a maze of rocks and scrub brush, still firing at the enemy positions. The last thing they heard was his voice on the radio. "Get home safe, brothers. Tell my family I love them." For 3 days, the remaining 7 SEALs fought their way through hostile territory, dodging patrols and surviving on rainwater and the few rations they had managed to carry. They reached a coalition forward operating base half dead from exhaustion and dehydration, but alive. Their first question was about their commander. Their second question was about rescue operations. The answers were not what they wanted to hear. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was listed as missing in action, presumed killed in combat. No rescue mission would be authorized for a single soldier in such hostile territory. The official report would state that he had died a hero's death, sacrificing himself so his men could escape. But Rodriguez, Williams, and the others refused to accept that their commander was dead. They had seen too much combat, lost too many friends, to give up on a brother without absolute proof. Morrison was a survivor, a warrior who had pulled them through impossible situations before. If anyone could survive behind enemy lines, it was him. The days turned into weeks as the team rotated back to the United States for debriefing and psychological evaluation. The official story was clean and heroic. A decorated SEAL commander had given his life to save his men. The families were notified, the medals were awarded, and the case was closed. But late at night, in the quiet moments when warriors remember their fallen brothers, Rodriguez and the others shared a secret hope that somewhere in those Afghan mountains, Jake Morrison was still alive. Military intelligence reports from the region painted a grim picture. Taliban activity had increased dramatically in the weeks following the firefight. Several coalition patrols had been ambushed with unprecedented accuracy and coordination. The enemy seemed to have advanced knowledge of troop movements and tactical plans. Something had changed in that part of Afghanistan, and it wasn't good news for Allied forces. What the intelligence reports didn't mention, what no one in the military hierarchy could have imagined, was that deep in the mountains where Morrison had disappeared, a legend was about to be born. The Taliban fighters who had participated in the ambush spoke in hushed tones about a ghost who stalked their camps at night. Sentries disappeared without a sound. Supply convoys were hit with surgical precision. And always, somewhere in the darkness, there was the crack of a rifle that never seemed to miss its target. The local population began sharing stories of a mysterious protector who struck at the Taliban with ruthless efficiency. Some claimed it was the spirit of a dead warrior seeking vengeance. Others whispered about a foreign soldier who had somehow survived and was waging a one-man war against the occupying forces. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one detail. Whoever was out there was very good at killing Taliban fighters. Colonel Hassan Mahmoud, the regional Taliban commander, was not a man easily frightened. He had fought the Soviets, survived the American invasion, and built a reputation as one of the most effective guerrilla leaders in Afghanistan. But the recent string of attacks on his forces had him genuinely concerned. His fighters were becoming superstitious and afraid, jumping at shadows and seeing enemies where none existed. "Find this ghost," he ordered his lieutenants. "I don't care if it's an American soldier, a local militia, or the devil himself. Find him and kill him. Our men cannot fight effectively while they fear the darkness." But finding a phantom proved easier said than done. The attacks continued with increasing frequency and lethality. Taliban commanders were found dead in their beds, their throats cut so quietly that guards sleeping feet away heard nothing. Weapons caches exploded in the night, destroying months of stockpiled ammunition. Convoys carrying supplies and reinforcements were ambushed by what appeared to be a single sniper, who could disappear into the landscape like smoke. Miles away at Bagram Air Base, intelligence analysts were poring over reports from the region with growing confusion and interest. The pattern of attacks was unlike anything they had seen from local resistance fighters. The tactics were too sophisticated, the target selection too strategic, and the execution too flawless for typical guerrilla activity. Captain Sarah Chen, a military intelligence officer specializing in Taliban operational patterns, was the first to notice the connection. These attacks all began approximately 2 weeks after we lost Lieutenant Commander Morrison, she told her supervisor. And they're all happening within a 50-kilometer radius of where his team was ambushed. Her supervisor, Major Thompson, was skeptical. You think a dead Navy SEAL is conducting ghost operations behind enemy lines? Chen, you've been staring at these reports too long. Sir, I'm not saying Morrison is alive. I'm saying someone with advanced military training is operating in that region, and the timing is more than coincidental. Chen pulled up a map on her computer screen, marking each attack with a red dot. Look at this pattern. These aren't random strikes. Someone is systematically dismantling Taliban infrastructure in that area. Thompson studied the map for a long moment. The pattern was indeed too organized to be coincidental. What do you recommend? I think we need to take a closer look at this region. If there's a friendly operative working behind enemy lines, we should know about it. And if there's a new resistance cell operating with this level of sophistication, we need to establish contact. What neither Chen nor Thompson could have known was that at that very moment, high in the mountains where their missing commander had disappeared, a figure was moving through the darkness with deadly purpose. The Taliban patrol never saw death coming. One moment they were walking along a goat path, the next moment their leader was falling with a bullet through his head. The remaining fighters scattered in panic, but the sniper was already moving, repositioning for the next shot. In the space of 10 minutes, 4 Taliban fighters were dead, and the rest were fleeing in terror, abandoning their weapons and equipment in their haste to escape the ghost who hunted them. When the sun rose the next morning, local villagers would find the bodies and whisper new stories about the phantom protector who struck from the shadows. The truth was both simpler and more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was indeed alive, but he was not the man who had led his team into those mountains weeks ago. Survival behind enemy lines had changed him in ways that went far beyond physical endurance. He had become something else entirely, a weapon forged in the crucible of isolation and desperation, tempered by loss and sharpened by an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. But Morrison was not fighting this war alone. In the caves and hidden valleys of those treacherous mountains, he had found an ally whose skills rivaled his own. Someone who had been fighting this war longer than any American soldier. Someone who had reasons for hating the Taliban that ran deeper than any political ideology. Someone whose very existence would challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about the war in Afghanistan. The legend of the Mountain Ghost was about to become very real, and Jake Morrison's team was about to learn that sometimes the dead can come back to fight again. Jake Morrison's consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark pool. Pain hit him in waves. His left shoulder felt like it was on fire. His head pounded with each heartbeat, and his mouth tasted like copper and dirt. He tried to move and immediately regretted it, as every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The cave around him was small and well concealed, barely large enough for 2 people. Sunlight filtered in through a cleverly camouflaged entrance, suggesting it was daytime, though he had no idea which day. His gear was gone except for his sidearm, which lay within easy reach. Someone had cleaned and bandaged his wounds with professional skill, using supplies that definitely weren't standard Taliban issue. "You're awake." The voice came from near the cave entrance, speaking English with a slight accent he couldn't immediately place. "I was beginning to wonder if you would ever wake up." Morrison turned his head slowly toward the voice and froze. Sitting cross-legged near the entrance, cleaning a sniper rifle with practiced efficiency, was a woman. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intense brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her clothing was a mixture of military surplus and local garb, all earth tones that would blend perfectly with the mountain terrain. But it was the rifle she was maintaining that caught his attention. A custom-built weapon that showed the kind of modifications only a true professional would make. "Who are you?" Morrison asked, his voice rough from dehydration. "Someone who has been fighting these mountains longer than you have been fighting anywhere," she replied without looking up from her work. "Someone who found you bleeding out in a ravine 3 days ago and decided you might be useful alive." Morrison tried to sit up and managed it on the second attempt, though the effort left him dizzy.
3 days?
"My team. Your team escaped. They made it to the coalition base and reported you killed in action. There was a memorial service yesterday, according to the radio chatter." She finally looked at him, and he could see something in her eyes that he recognized from his own mirror, the hardness that came from too much combat, too much loss. "They think you're dead, Commander Morrison." The fact that she knew his name and rank wasn't particularly surprising. His dog tags were visible, and anyone monitoring coalition radio traffic could have pieced together his identity. What surprised him was how she said it with a familiarity that suggested she knew more about him than just his military records. How do you know about my team's extraction? She gestured toward a sophisticated radio setup hidden deeper in the cave. I monitor all coalition frequencies. It helps me stay alive and occasionally provides useful intelligence. She set down her rifle and reached for a canteen, which she tossed to him. Drink slowly, you lost a lot of blood. The water was clean and cool, tasting better than anything Morrison could remember drinking. As his head cleared, he began to take inventory of his situation. He was alive, which was more than he had expected. He was being helped by someone who clearly had military training and equipment, and according to his mysterious rescuer, the outside world thought he was dead. Why did you save me? He asked. Because dead American soldiers don't kill Taliban fighters. She picked up her rifle again and began reassembling it with fluid automatic movements. And you have killed quite a few Taliban fighters over the years, haven't you, Commander? Morrison studied her more carefully. Everything about her spoke of professional military training. The way she handled weapons, her tactical awareness, even the way she positioned herself near the cave entrance to maintain visibility while staying in cover. But she wasn't wearing any uniform or insignia that would identify her unit or nationality. Are you American military? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am many things, Commander Morrison, but I have not been American military for a very long time. She stood and moved to the cave entrance, scanning the terrain outside with practiced eyes. The question is not who I am. The question is what you are going to do now that you are officially dead. Dad. The weight of that statement hit him like a physical blow. His team thought he was gone. His family would be notified, would grieve for him. His military career was over. His life as he knew it finished. But strangely, instead of despair, he felt an odd sense of liberation. Without the constraints of official military protocol, without the need to follow orders or file reports, what could he accomplish? The Taliban fighters who ambushed your team, the woman continued, still watching the landscape outside, they were not random militia. They were professional soldiers, well-equipped and well-trained. Someone gave them very specific information about your mission, where you would be, when you would be there, and how many men you would have. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. You're saying we were betrayed. I am saying that your mission was compromised from the beginning. The question is whether it was betrayed by incompetence or by design. She turned back to face him. Either way, the men responsible are still out there, still sending good soldiers into traps. The implications were staggering. If their mission had been compromised, how many other operations were at risk? How many more American soldiers would walk into carefully prepared ambushes? The thought filled him with a cold rage that burned away the last of his confusion and self-pity. What do you propose we do about it? We? She raised an eyebrow. Commander Morrison is dead. His war is over. But if a ghost wanted to continue fighting, if that ghost wanted to make the people responsible pay for their betrayal, well, ghosts can go places and do things that living soldiers cannot. Morrison understood perfectly. Cut free from military regulations, chain of command, and rules of engagement, he could wage the kind of war that would be impossible for an official military unit. The Taliban fighters who had ambushed his team, the networks that supported them, the corrupt officials who might be feeding them information, all of them were now potential targets. I'll need equipment, he said simply. Equipment can be acquired. She gestured toward her rifle. I have been acquiring equipment from Taliban forces for months. They have excellent weapons once you remove them from their previous owners. Over the next several hours, as Morrison's strength returned, she told him her story. Her name was Nadia Petrov, though she hadn't used that name professionally in over a decade. She had been born in Afghanistan to a Russian father and Afghan mother during the Soviet occupation. Her father had been a Spetsnaz officer, her mother a local woman who had fallen in love with the enemy. When the Soviets withdrew, the family had tried to leave together, but only Nadia had made it out alive. She had been raised in Russia, trained in their military academies, and eventually recruited into their special forces. But when the Russians had abandoned Afghanistan completely, leaving behind allies and promises, she had returned on her own. For 15 years she had been fighting a personal war against the Taliban, a ghost who struck from the mountains and disappeared like smoke. Why tell me this? Morrison asked. Operational security suggests you should keep your background classified, because dead men tell no tales. She replied. And because I have been fighting this war alone for too long, the Taliban are getting stronger, better organized, more dangerous. They have new leadership, new funding, new weapons. One person, no matter how skilled, cannot defeat an army. Morrison was beginning to understand her proposal. Two ghosts could accomplish things that one could not. An American with extensive combat experience and knowledge of coalition tactics, paired with a Russian who knew the terrain and the enemy better than anyone alive, could wage a campaign that would be devastating to Taliban operations in the region. What about extraction? He asked. Eventually, this war will end. What happens to ghosts when the shooting stops? Ghosts do not worry about the future, Commander. Ghosts worry about the mission. Her voice carried a finality that suggested she had already made peace with whatever ending awaited her. Are you prepared to become a ghost? Morrison thought about his team, safely extracted and heading home to their families. He thought about the ambush that had nearly killed them all, about the betrayal that had put them in danger. He thought about all the other American soldiers who might face similar traps if the people responsible weren't stopped. The choice was surprisingly easy. When do we start? Her smile was predatory. We already have. While you were unconscious, I conducted reconnaissance on the Taliban unit that ambushed your team. They are based in a compound about 20 kilometers from here, along with their commander and most of their equipment. She pulled out a hand-drawn map, showing terrain features and defensive positions with military precision. Tomorrow night we introduce ourselves. The attack on the Taliban compound was planned with surgical precision. Nadia had been watching the target for weeks, learning their routines, identifying their weaknesses, mapping their defensive positions. The compound was built around an old Soviet-era structure, with modern additions that showed the Taliban's growing sophistication and resources. Morrison studied the intelligence materials she had gathered, photographs, sketches, timing charts for guard rotations. The professionalism was impressive, rivaling anything he had seen from coalition intelligence units. This woman had been fighting her own war with remarkable effectiveness. 43 fighters, she explained, pointing to various positions on her map. Plus their commander, a man named Hassan who ordered the ambush on your team. They have heavy weapons, mortars, and a communications center that coordinates activities for the entire region. Extraction plan? The same plan that has kept me alive for 15 years. We go in fast, hit hard, and disappear before they can organize a response. She looked at him seriously. This is not a coalition military operation, Commander. There will be no air support, no backup, no rescue if things go wrong. We succeed or we die trying. Morrison felt the familiar pre-mission tension settling over him, the heightened awareness that came before combat. But there was something else too, a freedom he had never experienced in his military career. No rules of engagement to constrain his actions, no political considerations to limit his targets, no bureaucracy to second-guess his decisions. What's the primary objective? Information first, elimination second. Hassan's communication center will have intelligence about other planned operations, details about their supply networks, possibly even information about their sources inside coalition forces. She paused. After we extract the intelligence, we eliminate the entire command structure and destroy their capability to conduct future operations. They spent the afternoon preparing equipment and reviewing the plan. Nadia's weapons cache was impressive, clearly the result of years of successful raids on Taliban positions. She selected a suppressed sniper rifle for herself and provided Morrison with an assault rifle and sidearm, all captured Taliban weapons that would leave no forensic trail back to coalition forces. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, the two ghosts prepared to begin their campaign. Morrison felt a strange sense of completion, as if his entire military career had been leading to this moment. All the training, all the combat experience, all the leadership challenges, they had prepared him to fight this kind of war. One last thing, Nadia said, as they prepared to leave the cave. Once we do this, there is no going back. You will be a wanted man by both sides. The Taliban will hunt you as an enemy, and the coalition will hunt you as a rogue operator. Are you certain this is the path you want to choose? Morrison thought about Rodriguez, wounded but still fighting. He thought about Williams desperately trying to raise someone on the radio. He thought about all the young soldiers who would follow in their footsteps, trusting that their missions were planned by competent people with their best interests at heart. I'm certain. The compound was quiet as they approached through the darkness. Two guards at the main entrance, one walking patrol along the perimeter, and sentries in the watchtowers at each corner. Standard security for a Taliban command post, adequate against local militia, but insufficient against professional operators who knew how to move unseen. Nadia took position on a ridge overlooking the compound, her sniper rifle trained on the watchtowers. Morrison moved through the shadows toward the communications building, his movements silent and deliberate. They had agreed on radio silence unless absolutely necessary. This operation would succeed or fail based on stealth and precision. The first sentry never knew what hit him. Morrison's knife found the guard's throat before he could cry out, and the body was hidden behind a supply shed within seconds. The second guard fell to a suppressed shot from Nadia's position, the sound no louder than a heavy book dropping. One by one, the outer defenses were neutralized with professional efficiency. The communications center was lightly defended, with only 2 operators on duty. Morrison slipped inside like a shadow, his suppressed pistol ensuring that neither man had a chance to send a warning. The equipment was a mixture of modern digital systems and older analog radios, all connected to a satellite uplink that provided the Taliban with sophisticated communications capabilities. Working quickly, Morrison began copying files from the digital systems while photographing documents and maps scattered around the command center. The intelligence was even more valuable than they had hoped. Detailed operational plans for attacks on coalition forces, financial records showing funding sources, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be classified American military documents that should never have reached Taliban hands. The sound of gunfire from outside told him that the silent phase of the operation was over. Nadia's voice crackled through his earpiece. Multiple contacts moving toward your position. Time to go. Morrison grabbed the last of the documents and planted demolition charges throughout the communications center. The explosion would destroy any intelligence they couldn't carry and eliminate the Taliban's ability to coordinate operations in the region. As he prepared to leave, he caught sight of one more document that made his blood run cold. It was an American military operations order, classified at the highest levels, detailing planned coalition activities for the next month. At the bottom, in what looked like handwriting, were notations in English identifying specific vulnerabilities and recommended ambush points. Someone with access to the highest levels of American military planning was actively betraying operations to the enemy. The firefight outside was intensifying as more Taliban fighters responded to the alarm. Morrison slipped out of the communications building and began moving toward his extraction point, but the compound was now fully alert and swarming with armed fighters. His path was blocked by at least a dozen enemy soldiers, and he could see muzzle flashes from multiple directions. Nadia's voice came through his earpiece again. Change of plans. Move to the east wall. I'm coming to get you. What happened next would become part of the legend that grew around the mountain ghosts. Nadia Petrov descended from her overwatch position like an angel of death, her rifle speaking with deadly accuracy as she moved through the compound. Taliban fighters fell with each shot, their return fire consistently missing a target that seemed to anticipate their movements and stay one step ahead of their aim. Morrison reached the east wall just as Nadia arrived, providing covering fire while he climbed over. Behind them, the communication center exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the night sky and sent Taliban fighters diving for cover. By the time they recovered enough to organize pursuit, the 2 ghosts had vanished into the darkness. 3 hours later, safely hidden in another cave high in the mountains, Morrison and Nadia examined the intelligence they had captured. The operational plans were devastating enough. The Taliban had detailed information about coalition patrol routes, base security procedures, and planned operations. But the handwritten notes were proof of something far worse. Someone in your military hierarchy is actively working for the enemy. Nadia observed, studying the documents. Someone with access to classified operational planning and detailed knowledge of American tactical procedures. Morrison felt sick as he realized the implications. How many American soldiers had died because of this betrayal? How many missions had been compromised? How many families had lost sons and daughters because someone in a position of trust had sold out his own people? We need to get this information to the right people, he said. What people? Nadia asked. You are dead, remember? And even if you were alive, how would you explain how you obtained this intelligence? By admitting you conducted an unauthorized raid on a Taliban compound while operating outside military command? She was right, of course. The very information that proved American soldiers were being betrayed also proved that he had gone rogue. Any official attempt to expose the traitor would result in his own court-martial and imprisonment. The system that should have protected American lives was the same system that would destroy him for trying to save them. Then we handle it ourselves, Morrison said quietly. Nadia smiled that predatory smile again. Now you are beginning to think like a ghost, Commander. The question is, are you prepared for what that means? The weeks that followed the communications center raid established a new kind of warfare in the Afghan mountains. The Taliban had faced American military might before, with its overwhelming firepower and technological superiority, but they had never faced anything like the 2 ghosts who now stalked them through their own territory. Every night brought new attacks, each one more devastating than the last, and the psychological impact was beginning to show in ways that conventional military operations had never achieved. Morrison had discovered that fighting without constraints was both liberating and terrifying. Without rules of engagement to limit his actions, without political considerations to protect civilian assets, without bureaucratic oversight to slow his decision-making, he could wage war with a ruthlessness that matched his enemies. But with that freedom came a terrible responsibility. Every action, every death, every consequence was his alone to bear. The intelligence they had captured from the communication center led them to a network of Taliban safe houses, weapons caches, and training facilities that stretched across 3 provinces. More importantly, it revealed the scope of the betrayal within American military ranks. The classified documents found their way to Taliban commanders through a complex chain that ultimately led back to someone with access to the highest levels of coalition planning. "We need to identify the source," Morrison told Nadia as they studied the documents for the 100th time. They were hidden in yet another cave, this one equipped with solar panels and communication equipment that Nadia had accumulated over years of solitary warfare. Someone is feeding tactical information directly to Taliban leadership. "The documents show a pattern," Nadia observed, pointing to markings on several operational plans. "Look at these notations. They're all in the same handwriting, and they all focus on the same type of vulnerabilities. Whoever is doing this has specific knowledge of American patrol patterns, convoy security procedures, and base defense protocols." Morrison felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest. Somewhere in the coalition command structure, probably sitting in a comfortable office and drawing American military pay, was a traitor whose information had killed his brothers. The thought consumed him with a hatred that was both pure and dangerous. Their campaign against the Taliban continued with mechanical precision. Weapons convoys disappeared in the night, their guards found dead, and their cargo redistributed to local villagers who had suffered under Taliban rule. Command posts were destroyed with surgical strikes that left no survivors to report what had happened. Supply lines were severed so efficiently that entire Taliban units found themselves cut off and starving in the mountains. But it was the psychological warfare that proved most effective. Taliban fighters began refusing night patrol duty, claiming the mountains were haunted by spirits who could kill without being seen. Commanders found themselves unable to maintain discipline as their men became increasingly superstitious and afraid. The mythology surrounding the mountain ghosts grew with each attack, taking on supernatural elements that made the reality even more terrifying. Colonel Hassan Mahmoud, the regional Taliban commander who had ordered the ambush on Morrison's team, was growing desperate. His forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy he could not identify, track, or predict. Worse, his communications with higher command had been cut off since the destruction of his primary radio facility, leaving him isolated and unable to request reinforcements. "Find them," he ordered his remaining lieutenants during an emergency meeting in what he hoped was a secure location. "I don't care what it costs, I don't care how many men we lose. Find these ghosts and kill them, or we will all be dead within a month." Unknown to Hassan, his supposedly secure meeting was being monitored by sophisticated surveillance equipment that Nadia had placed weeks earlier. Every word was being recorded, every plan noted, every weakness identified. The Taliban commander was playing checkers while his opponents were playing three-dimensional chess. Morrison was studying the surveillance reports when Nadia returned from a reconnaissance mission with news that changed everything. "I found him," she announced, dropping a folder full of photographs and documents on the table between them. "Hassan? No, you're traitor." She spread the photographs across the table, showing a man in American military uniform meeting with known Taliban intermediaries. His name is Major David Chen, Deputy Intelligence Officer for Regional Operations. He has been selling classified information to the Taliban for over 2 years. Morrison studied the photographs with growing amazement and fury. The man in the pictures was someone he recognized. He had attended briefings where Chen had presented intelligence assessments, had trusted the man's analysis when planning operations. The betrayal was personal in a way that cut deeper than strategic considerations. "How did you find him?" "I had been tracking the intelligence flow for months, following the documents from Taliban hands back through their network of sources and intermediaries. The trail led to a Pakistani businessman who serves as a go-between, and from there to Chen." Nadia pulled out additional surveillance photos showing Chen accepting payment from Taliban agents. "He meets with his handlers twice a month at a hotel in Islamabad, always on weekends when he is officially on leave." Finally, they had identified the source of the betrayal that had put his team in danger and gotten countless American soldiers killed. But satisfaction quickly gave way to a more practical concern. What could they do about it? "We can't take this to American authorities," he said. "Even if they believed us, the evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance and unauthorized operations. Chen would walk free on technicalities, and we would face court-martial for operating outside our authority. Then we handle it the same way we have been handling everything else."
Nadia replied simply.
"Chen has a meeting scheduled for next weekend. He will not be returning from that meeting." The assassination of a serving American military officer was a line Morrison had never imagined crossing. Despite everything he had done, despite all the Taliban fighters he had killed, despite his willingness to operate outside military authority, the idea of killing one of his own countrymen felt fundamentally different. "There has to be another way," he said. "What other way?" Nadia's voice carried no emotion, no judgment, just practical assessment. "You cannot expose him through official channels. You cannot arrest him without revealing your own illegal activities. You cannot simply disappear him without creating an investigation that might expose everything we have accomplished." She paused, studying his face. "Sometimes, Commander, ghosts must make choices that living soldiers cannot." Morrison understood the logic, but understanding and accepting were different things. Chen was a traitor who had betrayed his oath and gotten American soldiers killed, but he was still an American officer. Killing him would make Morrison something more than a rogue operator. It would make him a murderer in the eyes of the law he had sworn to protect. But the alternative was letting Chen continue his betrayals, continue selling American lives for Taliban money. How many more ambushes would be set with his information? How many more families would receive folded flags and hollow words about heroic sacrifice while the real killer collected his payment and planned the next betrayal? "There might be a third option," Morrison said slowly.
What if we exposed him in a way that forced American authorities to act but didn't reveal our own involvement?
Nadia raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "We have photographs of Chen meeting with Taliban agents, accepting money, passing classified documents."
What if those photographs found their way to American military investigators through an anonymous source? What if Chen's Taliban contacts suddenly started cooperating with coalition forces, providing information about American betrayals in exchange for protection? It was a complex plan that would require careful orchestration and perfect timing. They would need to capture several of Chen's Taliban contacts, convince them to cooperate with American authorities, and ensure that the evidence against Chen was presented in a way that appeared to come through legitimate intelligence channels. But if it worked, it would accomplish their objective without requiring Morrison to cross the line into killing fellow Americans. The plan took 3 weeks to execute. First, they identified and captured 2 of the Pakistani intermediaries who facilitated Chen's meetings with Taliban leadership. Under interrogation, both men provided detailed information about the intelligence network, including documentation of payments and copies of classified documents. More importantly, they agreed to cooperate with American authorities in exchange for protection and relocation. Next, they staged a series of Taliban attacks on coalition forces that were designed to fail in ways that would force American intelligence to question their security procedures. When multiple operations were compromised in identical ways, investigators would be compelled to look for the source of the leaks. The captured intermediaries would provide the answers they needed. Finally, they arranged for Chen's Taliban contacts to be captured during a carefully orchestrated raid that would appear to be a routine coalition operation. Under interrogation, these contacts would reveal their American source, providing investigators with the evidence they needed to build a case. The plan worked perfectly. Within days of the staged captures, American military investigators had enough evidence to arrest Chen and begin unraveling his entire network of betrayal. The major was quietly court-martialed, convicted of treason, and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His Taliban contacts were eliminated in what appeared to be internal power struggles, but which were actually surgical strikes by the mountain ghosts. With the source of intelligence leaks eliminated, Morrison and Nadia turned their attention back to the Taliban forces in their region. But something had changed during their focus on Chen. The enemy had adapted to their tactics and was no longer the disorganized, demoralized force they had been fighting. New Taliban leadership had arrived from Pakistan, bringing with them advanced communications equipment, sophisticated weapons, and most importantly, a detailed analysis of the ghost attacks. These weren't local militia commanders who could be intimidated by psychological warfare. These were professional soldiers who understood what they were facing and had developed countermeasures. "They know we are only 2 people," Nadia observed as they studied intelligence reports about the new Taliban leadership. "They've analyzed our attack patterns, identified our limitations, and developed tactics specifically designed to counter our operations." Morrison nodded grimly. The new Taliban commanders had correctly assessed that the mountain ghosts, despite their effectiveness, were ultimately limited by their small numbers. By spreading their forces across a wider area and maintaining constant communication between units, they could force the ghosts to choose between targets while ensuring that any attack would trigger immediate reinforcement from multiple directions. "We need to change our approach," Morrison said. "What we've been doing won't work against professional opposition, or we need to change our capabilities," Nadia replied. "Two ghosts can accomplish much, but an army of ghosts could accomplish anything." She was suggesting something that had occurred to Morrison weeks earlier, but which he had been reluctant to pursue. Throughout their operations, they had encountered local Afghan fighters who opposed Taliban rule but lacked the training and equipment to be effective. Village elders who had lost family members to Taliban brutality, young men who wanted to fight but had no one to teach them, women who had suffered under extremist oppression but had no way to strike back. "Are you suggesting we start recruiting?" "I am suggesting we stop limiting ourselves to what two people can accomplish." Nadia pulled out a map showing villages throughout their operational area. "These people have been fighting the Taliban longer than either of us. They know the terrain better than we do, they have sources of information we cannot access, and they have reasons for fighting that go beyond military objectives." The idea of training and equipping local fighters appealed to Morrison on multiple levels. It would multiply their operational capacity while helping people defend themselves against Taliban oppression. But it would also mean revealing their existence to others, which carried enormous risks. "Operational security," Morrison pointed out. "The more people who know about us, the greater the chance of compromise. The greater the chance of betrayal, yes. But also, the greater the chance of victory." Nadia's expression was serious. "We have accomplished much as Ghosts, Commander, but we cannot defeat an entire Taliban army with just 2 rifles. At some point, we must choose between absolute security and ultimate victory." Morrison considered the implications. Training local fighters would require establishing secure bases, developing supply lines, creating command structures, all the things that would make them vulnerable to detection and counterattack, but it would also give them the manpower to conduct simultaneous operations across the entire region, potentially driving the Taliban out of areas they had controlled for years. "What do you recommend?" "Start small. Identify a handful of the most reliable local leaders, people who have demonstrated their commitment to opposing Taliban rule. Train them in basic tactics and advanced marksmanship, provide them with captured Taliban weapons, and coordinate their activities with our own operations." Nadia paused. "If it works, we expand. If it fails, we disappear back into the mountains." The recruitment phase took 2 months and was more successful than Morrison had dared hope. The local fighters they identified were highly motivated, quickly trainable, and intimately familiar with Taliban operating procedures. More importantly, they provided intelligence about Taliban activities that even Nadia's sophisticated surveillance couldn't match. Khalid Ahmadzai, a village elder whose sons had been murdered by Taliban fighters, became their most valuable recruit. His network of contacts throughout the region provided early warning of Taliban movements and detailed information about their plans. His intimate knowledge of local politics helped identify which village leaders could be trusted and which were secretly supporting the enemy. Fatima Karimi, a school teacher whose husband had been killed for allowing girls to attend classes, proved to be a natural sniper with an uncanny ability to predict Taliban patrol routes. Her motivation for fighting was personal and absolute. She wanted to create a world where her daughters could grow up without fear. Within 6 weeks, Morrison and Nadia had trained a core group of 15 local fighters who formed the nucleus of a larger resistance network. These fighters, in turn, began recruiting and training others, creating a decentralized organization that could continue operating even if key leaders were eliminated. The transformation of their operational capacity was dramatic. Instead of conducting 1 or 2 attacks per week, they could now coordinate simultaneous operations across multiple provinces. Taliban supply lines were cut in a dozen places at once, forcing the enemy to spread their forces thin to protect their logistics. Command posts were attacked simultaneously from multiple directions, preventing mutual reinforcement and ensuring total destruction. But the most significant change was psychological. The local population, which had lived in fear of Taliban reprisals, began to see that resistance was possible. Village elders who had been forced to cooperate with Taliban demands started refusing their orders. Young men who had been intimidated into silence began providing intelligence to the resistance network. Women who had been oppressed and brutalized found ways to contribute to the fight for their own freedom. Colonel Hassan Mahmoud realized he was facing something entirely new when 3 of his major supply depots were destroyed on the same night by coordinated attacks that left over 40 of his fighters dead. The precision and simultaneity of the operations indicated a level of organization that went far beyond two individual operators, no matter how skilled. This is no longer a terrorist problem, he told his remaining commanders during what he knew might be his final staff meeting. This is a full-scale insurgency being led by professional military operators with extensive local support. Hassan was correct, but his realization came too late to save his forces. The network that Morrison and Nadia had created was growing exponentially, fed by years of Taliban oppression and brutality. Every family that had lost members to Taliban violence, every village that had suffered under their rule, every woman who had been denied education or freedom, all of them became potential recruits for the resistance. The final battle for the region came 6 months after Morrison and Nadia had first met. Hassan had consolidated his remaining forces in a fortified compound near the Pakistani border, hoping to hold out until reinforcements could arrive from Taliban leadership. He had over 200 fighters, heavy weapons, and defensive positions that should have been impregnable. But the attack that came against his compound involved over 400 resistance fighters, coordinated by Morrison and Nadia, using tactics that combined American military doctrine with Soviet special operations procedures and local guerrilla knowledge. The assault began before dawn and was over before sunset, resulting in the complete destruction of Taliban forces in the region. Hassan himself was captured alive, though not by Morrison or Nadia. The local fighters insisted on handling his trial and execution according to traditional Afghan justice, a request that the two ghosts honored. The regional Taliban commander who had ordered the ambush on Morrison's SEAL team was hanged at sunrise by people whose families he had terrorized for years. In the months that followed, the resistance network that had begun with two ghosts in a cave grew into a regional liberation movement that drove Taliban forces out of 3 provinces and established stable local governance based on traditional Afghan democratic principles. The success attracted attention from coalition leadership, who began providing covert support and recognition to the resistance fighters. Morrison and Nadia never claimed credit for their role in creating the movement. They remained ghosts, operating in the background and ensuring that local leaders received recognition for their achievements. But those who knew the truth understood that two people, willing to sacrifice everything for justice, had changed the course of the war in ways that conventional military operations never could. The legend of the mountain ghosts eventually spread beyond Afghanistan, inspiring resistance movements in other conflict zones around the world. Military historians would later study their tactics and strategies, trying to understand how two individuals had accomplished what entire armies had failed to achieve. But the real secret was simpler than any academic analysis could capture. Sometimes, when everything seems lost, salvation comes from the most unexpected source. Sometimes, when the system fails, individuals must step outside that system to protect what matters most. And sometimes, when all hope is gone, ghosts can accomplish what the living cannot. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison never returned from that mission in the Afghan mountains, but the ghost he became, fighting alongside a legendary female sniper who had dedicated her life to justice, proved that some battles are too important to be left to governments and armies. In the end, they had not only saved themselves, they had saved everyone who came after them. The war in Afghanistan would continue for years, but in one small corner of that ancient land, freedom had been won by people who refused to accept that victory was impossible. And somewhere in those mountains, two ghosts continued their eternal watch, ready to fight again if the need arose.